They bullied me relentlessly all through school and laughed at the idea I'd ever succeed. So years later, I rented a helicopter, crashed their reunion in style, and watched their smiles disappear. I didn't even want to open the envelope at first. It was sitting there on my kitchen counter, buried under some junk mail, like it had been quietly waiting for the right moment to ruin my day. White paper, bold black lettering, gold embossed border. The kind of thing that screams special occasion, but for me, felt more like a bad joke. Jefferson High, class of 2010, reunion. The words might as well have been written in blood. I stared at it for a long time, feeling that old knot in my stomach twist tighter. I could practically hear the voices already, the snickers, the fake polite greetings, the muttered, "Can you believe he actually showed up?" to someone's friend. It had been 15 years since I walked out of that school for the last time, but somehow the memories were still sharp enough to cut. High school was supposed to be where you find yourself, right? Yeah, well, I found out that sometimes all you really find is where you don't belong. From the first week of freshman year, I was marked like a deer with a limp wandering into a wolf pack. I wasn't the class clown or the sports guy or the charming kid who could talk his way out of detention. I was just me. Awkward, quiet, skinny in a way that made my elbows look like weapons. And that was enough. The ringleader was Ryan Calloway, quarterback. Homecoming king, cliche in a Letterman jacket. His sidekicks were basically clones of him, just with worse haircuts. To them, I was plain boy because I'd once mentioned in a get-to-know-you icebreaker that my dream was to be a pilot. That single throwaway comment became my permanent label, plain boy. Said with a smirk, like they were spitting something bitter out of their mouths. The first big hit came sophomore year, cafeteria lunch. I was carrying a tray, minding my business, when I heard Ryan's voice call out across the room. "Yo, plain boy, you gonna fly us to class on your paper airplane?" Laughter. Not just from his table, from half the room. I tried to ignore it. Kept walking, but then one of his buddies accidentally stuck his foot out. Tray down, milk all over my jeans, a burger sliding across the floor like it was trying to escape too. The whole cafeteria erupted, and there it was, the first real memory that would burn itself into my brain. It didn't stop there. They'd draw little cartoon planes on my locker, complete with stick figures falling out. Shoved paper airplanes at me in the hallway. Once, Ryan convinced the gym teacher to have me demonstrate how to run a lap, and tripped me halfway through. The worst part wasn't even the bullying. It was the people who saw it and laughed. Kids I thought were decent, even some I'd called friends in middle school. They all chose the safer side. And the teachers, forget it. If I complained, it was brushed off with, "Just ignore them, they'll get bored." They didn't. Senior year, the last week before graduation. By then, I'd gotten better at keeping my head down, counting the days until I could leave. But Ryan wasn't done. During the end of year assembly, where awards were being handed out for everything from sports to most likely to succeed, Ryan got the student council to add a funny category, most likely to crash and burn. And guess whose name they called? I remember walking up to that stage, every muscle in my body screaming at me to just turn and run, but I didn't. I took the little paper award they printed, walked back to my seat, and kept my face blank. Inside, though, something cracked. That was the moment I promised myself I would get out. I would make something of myself. And one day, I'd make sure Ryan Calloway and everyone who laughed would know exactly who I became. The reunion invitation was still sitting there, like a dare. 15 years later, I had a life no one at Jefferson High would have predicted. But in that moment, I realized I'd never really closed that chapter. I'd just put it in storage. And now, they wanted to see me again? Fine. But I wouldn't just show up. I'd make damn sure they'd never forget it. That night after the invitation came, I didn't sleep. Not because I was upset, not in the way I used to be. No. This time it was because my brain wouldn't stop running the reel of everything that had happened after high school. The years when I'd started clawing my way up from nothing, fueled by the promise I made to myself in that auditorium. When I left Jefferson High, I didn't have some tearful goodbye to friends. I didn't have a car full of dorm stuff headed to a big university. I had a duffel bag, a few $100 saved from mowing lawns, and the unwavering belief that if I could just get into aviation school, I could rewrite everything. Except aviation school wasn't cheap. The tuition alone was enough to make me consider giving up before I even started. But I didn't. I worked part-time jobs, anything that paid. Stocking shelves overnight at a grocery store, flipping burgers, cleaning offices. During the day, I enrolled in a community college that had a small aviation program. It wasn't glamorous. The flight simulator was basically an ancient PC hooked up to a joystick from the 90s, but it was a start. It was during my second semester that I met Tom Harris, a retired commercial pilot who taught part-time. Tom had that calm, steady energy that made you want to listen when he spoke. He didn't laugh when I told him about my dream. Instead, he said, "You got more drive than most kids I see here. That's half the battle." He helped me get my first small loan to cover a real flying lesson in an actual plane, not a simulator. I'll never forget the first time we went up. The world below looked so small. Not just physically, I mean everything. The people, the pettiness, the crap that had kept me down in high school, all of it shrank the higher we climbed. I was hooked. The problem was, flying wasn't something you could just dabble in. It cost money, a lot of money. And I didn't have any, so I started looking for ways to make it work. That's when I bought a used DSLR camera off Craigslist for $200 and began taking photos of planes at the local airfield. At first, it was just for fun. Then one day, a small charter company asked if they could buy some of my shots for their website. It wasn't much, but it was something. I turned it into a side hustle aviation photography. Weekends, I'd be at the airfield, snapping everything from little two-seaters to corporate jets, selling prints to pilots or small businesses. Slowly, that money went back into lessons. Lesson by lesson, hour by hour, I built toward my pilot's license. One rainy Tuesday, I was working the register at a gas station, one of my many jobs at the time, when I saw him, Ryan Calloway. He looked older, but not in the good way. Softer around the edges, still wearing a baseball cap like he'd just walked off the field, even though it had been years. He didn't recognize me at first, not until I handed him his change. His eyes narrowed just a bit, and then came that smirk. "Plane boy? No way, you still around here?" I could feel the old anger bubbling up, but I kept my voice flat. "Yeah, still around." He chuckled and shook his head. "Man, I figured you'd be, I don't know, working at an airport gift shop or something. Guess I wasn't far off, huh?" I didn't answer. I just slid his receipt toward him and walked away. But inside, it lit a fire. Because I knew one day, that smug look was going to disappear. 2 more years. That's how long it took me to scrape together the money, log the hours, and finally pass my check ride. When the examiner shook my hand and said, "Congratulations, you're officially a pilot," I almost laughed. Because all I could hear in my head was Ryan's voice in the cafeteria, mocking me for even saying the word plane. It was more than a license. It was my proof to myself, to everyone who doubted me, that I could turn that cafeteria joke into something real. And that was just the beginning. By the time I got back to my apartment that day, I'd already decided I wasn't stopping here. If I could get a license, I could get a business. If I could get a business, I could make damn sure that by the time the next reunion rolled around, no one would be laughing anymore. Getting my pilot's license was like crossing a finish line, only to realize it was actually the starting line. I thought the hard part was over. I was wrong. Flying was one thing. Making a living flying, that was a whole different altitude. The first paying job I landed was with a small charter company that ferried people between cities too small for major airlines. It wasn't glamorous. The planes were old. The pay was lousy, and sometimes my passengers were just a crate of medical supplies. But every hour in the air was more experience in my logbook, and every landing taught me something new about weather, about handling unexpected situations, and about staying calm when things didn't go according to plan, which, in aviation, is often. The other pilots, they were decent guys. Most of them didn't care where you came from, only whether you could land the damn plane in one piece. That acceptance, quiet as it was, meant more to me than I could put into words. It was on one of those flights, a quick hop to a coastal town, that I got my first taste of the kind of future I wanted. My passengers that day were a young couple from Chicago who'd rented the plane for a surprise anniversary trip. They were the kind of people who didn't blink at paying a few thousand for a weekend getaway. Somewhere between takeoff and landing, the wife asked me, "Do you ever think about starting your own charter service?" At the time, I laughed it off. But the idea lodged itself in my head and stayed there. The next few years were a blur. I took every extra shift I could, picked up freelance aviation photography gigs on the side, and lived like I was allergic to spending money. No fancy apartment. No new clothes unless my old ones literally fell apart. Every spare dollar went into a separate savings account I didn't touch. When other people my age were buying cars or going on trips, I was scouring classified ads for used aircraft listings. Just looking. For now. Her name was Silverbird, a battered but dependable Beechcraft Baron I found in a dusty hangar outside Nashville. The owner was retiring, and after a lot of negotiating and draining my savings, she was mine. Owning a plane wasn't like owning a car. You couldn't just park it in your driveway. There were hangar fees, maintenance, inspections. It was terrifying, honestly. But I knew if I waited until I felt ready, I'd never take the leap. I started small. Scenic flights over the city, weekend getaways to nearby beach towns, aerial photography for real estate developers. Word of mouth did more for me than any marketing could. People liked the experience of flying with the local pilot who owns his own plane. I called the business Skyreach Charters. The name made me smile. It sounded like possibility. And then slowly, the clientele started to change. I went from flying families on sightseeing trips to transporting executives, artists, and even a few low-profile celebrities who valued privacy. It was during this time, maybe 5 years after my gas station encounter, that I saw Ryan Calloway for the second time. I was at a private airfield fueling up before a charter, and there he was, standing by a beat-up pickup truck, looking at the helicopter tours sign. He recognized me this time, but his smirk faltered when he saw the embroidered Skyreach Charters logo on my jacket. "Wait, this yours?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I fly and manage it." He gave a low whistle. "Damn, guess you stuck with the whole plane thing, huh?" "Yeah," I replied. "Guess I did." I didn't need to say more. The silence between us said everything. Within 3 more years, I had a small team. 2 other pilots, a part-time marketing assistant, and a mechanic who could fix anything with wings. We expanded our fleet to include another Beechcraft and a sleek Cessna Citation for longer trips. I kept a low profile though. No bragging, no look at me social media posts. I wasn't building this for likes. I was building it for the day I knew would come. And then, one Thursday afternoon, while going through the week's bookings, I saw it. An email. Subject: Jefferson High, Class of 2010, Reunion, RSVP. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. I'd been waiting for this moment for over a decade, and I knew exactly how I was going to make my entrance. The email sat open on my screen for a good 5 minutes before I moved. It was polite, formal, a little too cheerful. "We can't wait to see everyone. Let's reconnect, reminisce, and celebrate where life has taken us." I chuckled. They had no idea. For 15 years, I'd been quietly building the kind of life none of them would have predicted for plain boy. Now, here was my shot, not just to show up, but to show up in a way they'd talk about for years. At first, I considered just rolling in with my nicest car, maybe a sharp suit. That would have been enough for most people. But this wasn't most people. This was Ryan Calloway. This was the cafeteria full of laughter. This was most likely to crash and burn. No. I wanted them to feel it in their bones. And that's when the idea hit me so obvious, I actually laughed out loud. I wasn't going to drive to the reunion. I was going to fly there. Literally. I'd flown helicopters before, a side skill I picked up during a lull in charter work. But this wasn't just about flying one. This was about making an entrance that no one else could. I called up a contact, Marcus, who ran a luxury aviation service in the city. Marcus owed me a favor after I'd once helped him out of a last-minute pilot shortage. "I need your nicest bird," I told him. "For when?" he asked. "Friday night, and I want it polished so clean you can see your reflection from 50 feet. You planning a proposal or something?" "Something," I said with a smile. "But not that." We settled on a sleek Black Bell 429, the kind of machine that looked like it belonged in a movie. I didn't want to overdo it with some tacky display of wealth. No gold watches, no screaming designer logos. I went to a custom tailor downtown, the kind where they offer you espresso while they measure you, and had a navy 3-piece suit made. Crisp white shirt, slim tie, Italian leather shoes. Understated, but perfect. The goal wasn't to shout. I made it. It was to walk in and make them wonder. Showing up early? Rookie mistake. No, the key to a perfect entrance is timing. I planned it down to the minute. The helicopter would circle once over the venue, then land at the nearby open lot they'd secured for the night. I'd step out right as the first hour of mingling hit, when people were relaxed. The drinks were flowing and everyone was deep in their "what have you been up to" conversations. The kind of moment when an arrival could stop everything. I wasn't going alone. Not because I needed a date, I didn't, but because I wanted the image to stick. So I invited Emily, a friend of mine who worked in luxury real estate. Tall, elegant, and with a natural confidence that could outshine anyone in the room. We'd never dated, but we understood each other. She knew exactly how to play along. "You want me to act like your girlfriend for the night?" she asked when I explained the plan. "More like co-conspirator," I said. "I'm in," she replied without hesitation, "but only if I get to wear the red dress." "Deal." I booked a private rooftop lounge for after the reunion. Open bar, champagne. Every detail meant to be a casual but clear statement. I'm not the same kid you remember. And of course, I made sure Ryan wouldn't be on the guest list for the after party. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. In the nights leading up to the reunion, I found myself lying awake, replaying old memories. Ryan pushing me into lockers. The paper airplane notes. That assembly award. And something about those memories didn't make me angry anymore. They made me focused. This wasn't about rubbing their noses in it just for revenge. It was about showing up as the proof that all their predictions had been wrong. By the time Friday rolled around, the plan was locked in. The suit was ready. The helicopter was fueled. Emily had texted a photo of her dress that made me grin. Everything was set. And as I zipped up my suit bag that afternoon, I couldn't help but think for the first time in my life that I was actually looking forward to seeing Ryan Calloway. The sound came first. That low, heavy thump, thump, thump that makes your chest vibrate before you even see it. I knew every head in the parking lot would turn skyward the second the blades cut through the evening air. And sure enough, as we circled once over the Jefferson High Gymnasium, the same one where I'd been humiliated in front of the entire school years ago, people started pouring outside. Phones came out. Hands shaded eyes. Laughter shifted into shouts of disbelief. I wasn't there yet, but I could already imagine the conversations. No way. Who the hell is that? Are we getting a surprise guest speaker or something? Wait, don't tell me. The bell, 429, descended smoothly into the open lot they cleared for extra parking. Dust swirled, dresses and ties fluttered in the rotor wash. The pilot cut the engines, and for a moment there was just stunned silence. Then the door swung open. I stepped out first. Navy suit, polished shoes, calm expression. Emily followed, red dress flowing, hair catching the evening light like it had been choreographed. We didn't rush. We didn't wave. We just walked, slow and steady, like we had nowhere else to be. And as we did, I saw it, the faces. Some lit up with genuine shock and excitement. Some twisted with jealousy. And then there was Ryan Calloway. He stood near the gym doors, beer in hand, mouth slightly open. For the first time in my life, he didn't look like he had a line ready. He just stared. Once we stepped inside, the buzz was electric. Conversations paused. Heads turned. And then, slowly, the crowd folded back into motion, but every few seconds, someone's eyes flicked to me. The decorations were typical. Banners, fairy lights, a DJ in the corner playing throwback hits from the 2010 S. But the energy wasn't about the music or the balloons. It was about me. Emily leaned close, whispering just loud enough for me to hear over the noise. You're officially the main event? I smirked. That was the point. It started small. Old classmates drifting over, drinks in hand. Some were polite, others overly enthusiastic, like they were trying to make up for years of ignoring me. Man, you clean up nice. So what do you do now? I knew you'd make something of yourself. They hadn't. I didn't brag. Didn't flex. I just dropped quiet, measured details. I run a private charter service, mostly corporate clients these days. Yeah, business has been good. Keeps me busy. The less I said, the more they leaned in. It didn't take long before Ryan pushed his way into the circle. He still had the broad shoulders, the confident stance, but now it looked like an act. Like he was trying too hard to summon the high school glory days. Well. Look who finally showed up. His tone was light, but the edge was there. That old smirk, the one that used to make me want to disappear into the floor. Except this time, it didn't land. People weren't laughing with him anymore. They were watching me. I smiled. Calm. Good to see you too, Ryan. He tried a few more jabs. Asked if I'd rented the helicopter just for the night. Joked that I was probably Ubering people around the sky. But every joke fell flat. The room wasn't with him. If anything, people looked uncomfortable. And then someone, I think it was Sarah from my chemistry class, piped up. Actually, Ryan, Jeff owns his own company. Skyreach Charters, right? I saw an article about you a while back. Ryan froze for just a fraction of a second. That tiny crack in his armor was everything I'd waited years to see. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. I just sipped my drink, smiled at Sarah, and said, yeah, that's me. And the look on Ryan's face, that mix of disbelief, irritation, and the dawning realization that the tables had turned, was better than any award I could have ever gotten in high school. The days after my conversation with Mason were a blur of possibilities. For years, I'd avoided even thinking about our 10-year high school reunion. When the email invite landed in my inbox months ago, I deleted it instantly, convinced I had nothing to prove and no desire to see the faces of people who once made my life hell. But Mason's little smirk and that single sentence, if you're going to show up, make it unforgettable, lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. I couldn't shake the thought. Not because I craved validation from them, but because, deep down, I wanted them to choke on their assumptions about me. I wanted their smirks to falter the way mine had in high school when they'd humiliated me. But showing up in a nice suit and an expensive car wasn't enough. Too many of them probably had nice cars by now. I needed something that screamed I made it without saying a word. That's when the memory hit me. Senior year, in the cafeteria, Cody Marks, the self-appointed king of bullies, had shoved my tray to the floor and said, even if you win the lottery, you'll still be a nobody. Guys like us, we get yachts. Guys like you get used Hondas. He said it loud enough for the entire lunchroom to hear, and everyone laughed. Back then, I laughed along, pretending it didn't sting, but sitting in my apartment years later, sipping coffee in my penthouse overlooking the city, I realized I'd been holding on to that moment for far too long. They thought my ceiling was a Honda. Fine. I'd make my entrance in something louder, something they couldn't ignore, something that would make Cody choke on his overpriced craft beer. A helicopter. It sounded insane at first. Who rents a helicopter just to attend a reunion? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. It was extravagant, ridiculous, and absolutely guaranteed to be the one thing they talk about for years. I started making calls. A few aviation companies turned me down when I mentioned the idea, apparently. Landing on the football field of my old high school during the reunion wasn't exactly standard procedure, but persistence had always been my weapon. I knew someone in event planning who knew someone in city permits. Within a week, I had a meeting lined up with a private charter pilot named Chase. Chase was in his late 40s, tanned, and looked like he'd been born in aviators. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair during our first meeting, "you want to drop into a high school reunion like you're in an action movie?" "Exactly," I said without flinching. He grinned. "I like your style, but you know this isn't cheap, and you'll need the school's permission for the field landing." "That's not a problem," I said, sliding a check across the table for the deposit. "Money's not the issue. Timing is." And just like that, the plan was in motion. While Chase worked on the logistics, I turned my attention to my appearance. I wasn't just going to arrive, I was going to look like the kind of man they never saw coming. Custom tailored, midnight blue suit, gold cufflinks, leather shoes sharp enough to cut glass. I even had my watch cleaned and polished until it gleamed under the light. Then came the accessories, not the flashy kind, but the ones that spoke volumes. I decided to bring along my partner, Ella. She wasn't just beautiful, she radiated confidence in a way that made people straighten their posture without realizing it. We'd met at a charity gala 2 years ago, and she had that rare mix of elegance and wit that made every conversation memorable. When I told her my plan, she smirked and said, "So, you're telling me you want me to look like I stepped out of a Bond film while you arrived from the sky like some billionaire superhero?" "Exactly," I grinned. "Then I'm in," she said without hesitation. By the week of the reunion, the pieces were set. I had the landing time confirmed, the permits approved, and the flight path cleared. Chase had even suggested we circle the school twice before touching down for dramatic effect, he'd said. On the morning of the event, I woke up early, heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not entirely. It was about rewriting the ending to a story that had haunted me for years. This time, when I walked into that gym, I wasn't going to be the awkward kid with his head down. I was going to be the man who shut every single one of them up without saying a word. And I could already picture it. Cody's face, frozen mid-laugh, his beer halfway to his mouth, eyes wide as the sound of rotor blades thundered overhead. That image alone was worth every single dollar. The moment the helicopter's skid touched down on the manicured lawn outside the country club, I swear time slowed. The thump of the rotor blades was deafening, but in my head it was dead silent. All I could see were faces. Faces that had been burned into my memory for years. Some frozen in shock. Some smirking, thinking it was some kind of prank. And a few already pale because they recognized me instantly. I stepped out slowly, letting the tailored charcoal suit catch the late afternoon sun. No tie, top buttons undone, the kind of casual power look I used to see in magazines when I was a kid and wonder what it'd feel like to wear. Now, I wasn't wondering. I was living it. A valet, probably no older than I was when I left this place, scrambled up, clearly not sure whether he should be offering to take my non-existent keys or just stand there. I gave him a nod, then slipped him 100 just for holding the door open. Not because I needed to flex on him, but because I remember what it felt like to be invisible. I wanted at least one person to walk away from tonight with a different memory. Inside, the reunion was in full swing. The open bar was stocked. The overpriced DJ was playing nostalgic early 2000s hits. Laughter echoed through the massive banquet hall. And then, like a ripple in a still pond, people started realizing I wasn't just some random rich guy wandering in. I locked eyes with Brad first. Brad, the golden boy, the one who used to shove me into lockers and ask if I'd found a date with my calculator yet. His smile faltered. His beer froze halfway to his mouth. His girlfriend, someone I didn't recognize, looked between us like she could feel the history but couldn't place it. I didn't give him the satisfaction of speaking first. I just smiled, walked past him like he was an irrelevant piece of furniture, and headed straight for the stage where the mic was set up for the next fun game the reunion committee had planned. "Sorry to interrupt," I said into the microphone, my voice calm but cutting through the chatter like a blade, "but I think we should get to the real reason we're here." There was a pause. A few people laughed awkwardly. Most just stared. I told them everything. Not with bitterness, not with rage, just matter-of-factly. I recounted the time Amanda poured soda into my backpack because she thought it would be hilarious to ruin the nerd's homework. I reminded Chad how he once tripped me in front of the whole cafeteria. I mentioned the whispered bets they made about whether I'd make it past 25 without moving back in with my parents. And then I told them how I'd built my company from scratch, how I'd sold it for more money than most of them would ever see in a lifetime, how I now had offices in 3 countries, a team of hundreds, and the freedom to show up here however the hell I wanted. I wasn't bragging, I was reclaiming the story. Some people clapped, some stayed dead silent. Brad looked like he'd swallowed glass. I finished by saying, "So, I'm not here for revenge, I'm here to remind you. Sometimes us quiet ones don't stay quiet forever." I put the mic down, turned to leave, and the room erupted, not in cheers, but in conversations, whispering, staring, processing. My job was done. The helicopter blades were still spinning when I stepped back outside. As we lifted off, I looked down at the shrinking building, the lawn, the people spilling out into the parking lot to see me go. Their world had just shifted, and for once, I was the one in control.